Drugémon, The Long Road to Recovery, Chapter 10. The ghost of the past. A week had passed since the chaotic night at the warehouse, a week spent on the run. Ash had been forced into the deepest, most dilapidated parts of Vermilion City, a labyrinth of crumbling tenements and forgotten alleyways. He was constantly looking over his shoulder, seeing the captain's thugs in every shadow, their faces superimposed onto the strangers he passed. His mission to protect Pikachu, already a monumental task, had become exponentially harder now that he was also being hunted. He sat in the shadow of a crumbling brick wall, sharing a piece of stolen, stale bread with a stray Growlithe, its ribs as prominent as his own. He was thinner, more tired than ever, but his eyes were sharp, constantly scanning his surroundings with a hyper-vigilance born of fear and desperation. He watched from a distance as Pikachu, equally desperate, tried to pickpocket a well-dressed passerby, only to be contemptuously kicked away, earning nothing for its efforts. The sight was another twist of the knife in Ash's already bleeding heart. At night, under the cloak of darkness, Ash would leave a small portion of his own meager food and a bowl of clean water at a spot he knew Pikachu frequented, a secluded corner behind a failing generator. He would then retreat into the shadows and watch as his friend eventually, cautiously, emerged to take the offering. It was the closest thing to a connection they had left, a fragile, unspoken truce in their silent war. He followed Pikachu to the industrial outskirts of the city, to the long, abandoned Kanto power plant. It was a colossal, decaying structure, a monument to a bygone era of prosperity, its skeletal frame humming with a faint, residual energy that made the hairs on Ash's arms stand on end. It was a place that naturally attracted electric-type Pokémon, and for Pikachu, it was a siren's call. It scrambled through a break in the fence, perhaps seeking the comfort of the familiar energy, a surge of power, or just a place to hide from the world that had become its enemy. Ash hesitated at the entrance. The place was notoriously dangerous, full of unstable machinery, treacherous catwalks, and feral Pokémon that had claimed the ruins as their own. As he was about to steel himself and enter, a voice stopped him, a voice he hadn't heard in years, but one that was as familiar to him as his own. "Still chasing after that Pikachu, I see." Some things never change. Ash turned, his heart leaping into his throat. Leaning against a crumbling wall, his arms crossed, was Brock. He was older, his face etched with a quiet, observant weariness that mirrored Ash's own. The cheerful, girl, crazy, aspiring breeder Ash remembered was gone, replaced by a man who had clearly seen his share of the world's hardships. He wore the simple, practical clothes of a doctor, and carried a well-worn medical bag. His ever-closed eyes, once a source of gentle humor, now seemed to hold a deep, knowing sadness, as if they saw more than most people's open ones. Brock. Ash was stunned, the name a disbelieving whisper on his lips. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," Brock replied, his voice calm and steady. "Last I heard, you were headed for the Indigo Plateau. You look like you took a wrong turn into a ditch. I run a clinic now on the edge of the slums, for the Pokémon no one else wants, the sick, the abandoned, the addicted. I've been hearing stories on the grapevine about a ghost in the alleys. A feral Pikachu and the shadow that follows it. I had a feeling that shadow might be you." Brock's clinic was a converted garage, a cramped space, but it was clean, organized, and filled with a quiet compassion that stood in stark contrast to the city outside. Cages lined the walls, holding a motley collection of the city's forgotten Pokémon. A sandshrew with a cracked shell being carefully treated, a Vulpix shivering with a fever, wrapped in a warm blanket. For the first time in weeks, Ash sat down, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. He told Brock everything, the crystals, the desperate journey to the Serenity Center, the escape, the feral shell that Pikachu had become, the fight club, the captain.
The whole sordid, painful story came pouring out of him, a torrent of guilt and grief that he had held inside for too long. Brock listened patiently, without judgment, cleaning and dressing a long, shallow cut on Ash's arm, a souvenir from a recent chase through a junk-filled alley. "You took him to the Serenity Center," Brock said when Ash had finished. "That place is a fortress. They have a high success rate, but their methods are rigid. For a bond like yours and Pikachu's, being torn apart like that, I'm not surprised he ran. In his mind, you didn't save him. You abandoned him. He hates me, Brock," Ash said, his voice thick with a fresh wave of guilt. "He looks at me, and all he sees is a monster." "He doesn't see you at all," Brock corrected gently. "He sees the addiction. It's whispering in his ear, telling him you're the enemy, the one who took him away from the only thing that makes him feel safe. The only way to break through that is to get him clean, and for that you need a plan. Chasing him through the streets isn't a plan. It's a slow suicide for both of you." Brock laid out a faded, hand-drawn map of the power plant on a small table. He pointed to a specific section, the main generator room. "The plant is dangerous, but it also gives us an advantage. The residual energy will attract Pikachu, but it can also be manipulated. I have a device that can create a small, localized electromagnetic pulse. It won't hurt him, but it will temporarily disrupt his electrical senses, disorient him. In that moment of confusion, we can secure him." He placed a specially designed, non-conductive net on the table, along with a syringe filled with a clear liquid. "This is a mild sedative. It will just put him to sleep, so we can bring him back here. I can manage his withdrawal. We can do this the right way. Not in a cold facility, but with someone he trusts even if he doesn't remember it right now." Ash looked at the tools, then at the determined, compassionate face of his old friend. For the first time since that devastating message had appeared on the terminal screen, he felt a flicker of something other than despair. It wasn't just about shadowing and protecting anymore. It was about rescuing. It was a dangerous, desperate plan, but it was the first real hope he'd had. The generator room was a vast, cavernous space, a graveyard of colossal, silent turbines. Thick cables hung from the ceiling like metallic vines, and the air crackled with a latent, untamed energy. Pikachu was perched on top of a turbine, absorbing the ambient electricity. It gave it a temporary, false sense of strength, a pale, unsatisfying imitation of the crystal's glorious rush. Suddenly, a high-frequency hum filled the air, and Pikachu's senses went haywire. The steady, comforting flow of energy turned into a disorienting, painful static. It was Brock's EMP device. Pikachu cried out, confused and agitated, its own electrical discharges sparking erratically into the air. As it stumbled, disoriented, Ash emerged from behind another turbine. He held the net, his movements slow and deliberate, his hands open to show he meant no harm. "It's okay, buddy," he said softly, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "I'm here. We're going to make this right." Pikachu, its senses screaming, saw the distorted image of its jailer, its abandoner, approaching. Fear and rage overrode the disorientation. With a piercing shriek, it unleashed a wild, uncontrolled thunderbolt, not at Ash, but at the ancient, rusted machinery around them. The bolt struck a massive control panel, which erupted in a shower of sparks. The old system, overloaded after decades of silence, gave a deafening groan. The giant turbines began to spin, slowly at first, then faster and faster, coming to life with a terrifying roar. The entire plant began to shake, the structure groaning under the impossible strain. The reactivation was catastrophic. The old, decayed structure couldn't handle the strain. The ceiling began to crumble, and rusted walkways buckled. Brock, positioned near the exit, yelled for Ash. "Ash, get out of there. The whole place is coming down." Pikachu, terrified by the chaos it had unleashed, was trapped on a high metal gantry. A huge piece of machinery, shaken loose from its mountings, broke free and swung down towards it. There was no escape. Without a second thought, Ash lunged forward and shoved Pikachu out of the way, taking the full, glancing blow of the falling debris himself. He was thrown against the railing, his leg twisting at a sickening, unnatural angle. He cried out in pain and collapsed, the net clattering uselessly away. Pikachu landed on the walkway, shaken but unharmed. It looked back and saw Ash, crumpled on the ground, having just saved its life, and through the thick, poisonous haze of its addiction, through the paranoia and the rage, something flickered, a memory, a ghost, 1,000 other moments just like this one, a montage of selfless sacrifice, of a boy who had always put himself in harm's way for its sake. The walkway groaned, about to give way. Brock scrambled to Ash's side, grabbing him under the arms and starting to drag him towards safety. Pikachu stood frozen, torn between its instinct to flee and this sudden, overwhelming ghost of a past loyalty. "Come on," Brock yelled, his voice strained as he pulled the semi-conscious Ash. "Let's go." Pikachu looked at the clear escape route, then back at the familiar, beloved figure of its trainer being pulled from the wreckage. For the first time in a long, long time, it didn't run away. It followed.